So on his way out the door, General Mark Milley, outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, big Ibram Kendi fan. Maybe he can help Ibram Kendi resuscitate his Center for Anti-Racism at Boston U now as Milley goes into retirement.
Got to reinvent himself, right?
Milley responded without responding directly to the statement that Trump made on Truth Social last week. Talking about Milley, he said, this guy turned out to be a woke train wreck who, if the fake news reporting is correct, was actually dealing with China to give them a heads up on the thinking of the President of the United States. This is an act so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death. And, of course, they immediately led the D.C. press corps to run for their fainting couches. Oh, my gosh, he's calling for the execution of General Milley and so on and so forth. Well, on his way out the door at his retirement ceremony, sorry I couldn't make it, Milley said, we don't take an oath to the country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or queen or a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
It still stings, huh?
Milley, you mean?
Facetious,
Yeah, I mean, stings Milley? Doesn't sting me. Milley's a douchebag. I'm sorry, but I don't know how else to describe him. He's been a disgrace during his tenure as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as far as I'm concerned. And, by the way, a disaster. I'm not just talking about his insulting testimony before congressional committees. I'm talking about, like, him along with Lloyd Austin being the architects of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Have we forgotten that? Boy, I tell you, they're really full of themselves for the performance on their watch, aren't they? I guess that's attendant to being one of the preferred elites of the D.C. press corps. You'll always get, hey, good graphic pieces in the Amazon Post so long as you're an antagonist to Trump or the next conservative du jour. What an insult, I think. I'm not a military guy, though, so maybe there were some different perspectives on him or some more textured reviews than I've given here. For that, we're pleased to be joined by Dakota Wood, who served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps and is a senior research fellow for defense programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, hope you had a good weekend.
I did until I read that piece about Milley's statement at the retirement. So anyway, General Milley, douchebag, not douchebag. I'll put that to you.
No, I think that's I think that's a little harsh.
Yeah.
Clearly, I mean, I have spoken about some of the problems that I and my colleagues had with Milley's statements. The whole thing about him trying to understand white rage and all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
His recoiling from the walk across. I can't remember now the name of the plaza. When all the rioting was going on in Washington D.C.
Right.
and stuff. So he has made some really bad stumbles or decisions very much in the public eye. But his military career in the Army was pretty decent, right? So it's, we have these very public moments that characterize a person's career where it probably doesn't actually capture the entirety of a career. So I do think that Milley had a very troubled tour or tenure as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I wish we had somebody else, but I wouldn't put his entire career and his character in flames.
Well,
the spat between him and Trump, I think, is childish.
Well, it's more, it's right, and it's more than Trump, as I mentioned, the Afghan withdrawal.
Right.
His fingerprints are on that. Number one, number two. How's recruitment going at the military under Lloyd with the armed services under Lloyd Austin and Mark Milley? Good or bad, as they've become more and more. If they more and more act in service of leftist cultural ideologues rather than our national security?
Yeah, well, again, I think we're painting a bit of a broad brush. The decision on the withdrawal came out of the White House. Austin, Milley, I dropped his name, the commander of U.S. Central Command, a guy I know, Kenneth McKenzie, and some others argued quite vigorously to use Bagram Air Base, to not do it as it was being executed. And they were told, no, you can't have the forces needed to run Bagram and others. And so they made the best they could out of a very bad situation.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's one thing. Obviously this came from the White House, and the person who is most to blame is Biden. But
Yeah.
They're also reporting after the fact that they, for example, they had a sniper who had a shot at the terrorist who blew up those 15 armed servicemen and women,
Yeah.
and they didn't take the shot. So that seems to me a operational call.
It is, and General McKenzie has talked about this, even in retirement on that they were inundated with all sorts of data. The person who said that they could have taken the shot has one story. From the command level, trying to sort through all the other information, it was not clear at all that they had indications of a specific person coming in toward the gate. So I know we're getting into these details,
Yeah.
but you brought up these little things. I'm just trying to tell the larger story. Recruiting is in a horrible mess, absolutely horrible mess. Do we ascribe that to a specific Secretary of Defense or Chairman of the Joint Chiefs? I don't think so, because it's more of a societal problem, right? I mean, obesity is rampant across America's youth. So do we blame a particular general or admiral for that? The willingness to serve the country, when in our schools and in our families and senior public officials, say that America is all broken. I mean, why would you want to join the military and stuff like that? So I think, again, that Austin and Milley could be much better spokesmen for the nobility of military service. But I think rampant criminal records, substance abuse, substandard educations in our secondary school systems, health problems, mental health problems, make 3/4 of American youth between 17 and 24 ineligible for service.
Well,
so again, I think it's a bigger story that really needs to be told.
Sure, those are all variables too, but this is not a cultural problem. This is a military problem or a political military problem.
It's a problem if you can't get people in. Why don't you have the people?
I'm getting to the next one, not what we were talking about. The next one, per a op-ed by Seth Cropsey, who's a former naval officer, right? He writes in the journal, the Sino-American military balance, America's greatest advantage is its submarine fleet. Our 50 nuclear-powered attack submarines are heavily armed with torpedoes and missiles, and soon will deploy unmanned unarmed vehicles and more advanced loitering munitions, flying drone with a warhead that can wait some time before engaging a target, and so on and so forth. But the headline of his piece is the sorry state of America's submarine fleet, saying our submarine fleet is increasingly decrepit, and that's increasingly provocative for the Chinese communists vis-a-vis Taiwan. So that has everything to do with who's in charge of the military and in the White House, and nothing to do with the larger culture.
Yeah, it's a 30-year problem in the aging and the degradation of our shipping yards, with the maintenance yards that can conduct maintenance on the submarines. So Virginia-class submarines are awesomely capable. They're the best submarines in the world. But if you don't have the pier space, the dry docks, and the trained workers to get in there and fix them, then you have a submarine that sits for a couple of years, literally, waiting to go into the yards to be fixed and come out. So the 50 submarines, maybe 20 of them are available on any given day. And so what Seth is talking about is the actual numbers battle. It takes $4 billion to build a Virginia-class submarine. It usually takes 2 to 3 years for them to come out of the yard. So right now the Navy is trying to build 2 of those per year. It won't be until the 2030s, when you look at retirements and new stuff coming in, that you get up to 60 attack submarines, which is what the objective is. And so his recommendation is, got it, Virginias are great. We don't have enough of them, and we don't have the shipyard capacity to keep them in good working order, so you have the numbers to apply against China. So let's look at Japan and Korea and some other places and buy diesel-powered submarines. They don't have the range or the endurance underwater that a nuclear-powered submarine does, but you would base them local to that theater. And so it's a proposal of his to boost the numbers of submarines by buying a $1 billion sub with shorter range, but you would use it in the Pacific theater, as opposed to waiting on the very long-term plan to fix our shipyards and get more of these nuclear-powered submarines into the water.
Diesel powered, though. I mean, you got to be green compliant. You mean windmill powered submarines?
Well,
right. Yeah. I mean, these diesel boats, they're great. They've got big battery packs on it. Because when you submerge, right, then it goes, it's called an air independent propulsion system, and it uses battery packs. So you can't stay underwater for extended periods of time, like you do with a nuclear powered boat. Right, you just don't have the exhaust capability, when you're underwater for, and that's not a World War II diesel sub. I mean, these are very advanced things; they're very quiet, but you just can't stay underwater as long as you would with a nuclear boat.
Now, who was responsible, do you think, for bringing wokeness into the military?
Oh, that's been a 20-year journey. It comes out of academia. It comes out of senior officers that are encouraged to broaden their scope and study not just warfighting, but get this more rounded education. How do you deal with other instruments of political power? Do you want to be in touch with American culture and these sorts of things? And so it's this academia, intellectual elite thing that comes into our system. And when you go from Republican to Democrat administrations, usually it's on the Democrat side that brings in these kind of leftist progressive liberals out of academia, and you start getting into critical race theory, right? And the environmental social governance sorts of things in corporate policy and identity politics, and you get to pick your own gender. And so the political appointees develop policy, implement that. The uniform class, may argue, maybe it doesn't, maybe they've bought into it, but they're going to salute and implement these orders or directives so long as they're not illegal, right? So there's a legality point to that. So it's a 20-year, maybe even going back to the Clinton administration, of putting in these officials. Some of the officials, once they're political appointees, they then called burrowing in. They turn the position into an actual long-term formal government position, government civil servant, and then you almost can't fire them. And so it starts to seed in this sort of destructive ideology.
We had Victoria Spartz, Representative Victoria Spartz, on the show last week, and of course, as you know, she's of Ukrainian extraction, now a Hoosier, and she seemed to be getting a bit weary of the what I would call propaganda, what you might call sort of hyperbole surrounding Ukrainian funding and the prospects for Ukraine to repel the Russians, and at what cost and on what timeline, all the things that we've been talking about. But I mean, she essentially said, at some point that there's going to have to be a negotiated deal between Zelensky and the Russians and Putin, and I know the sort of standard response is, well, that takes two, and Putin's not willing. But is that where you still is that where you see this ultimately going, or is it still open ended?
No, I think it will be a negotiated settlement. It won't be a negotiation. I think Ukraine is going to have to take a really lousy deal and just swallow it, right? And that it's not just in the U.S., but in the publics of many European countries are kind of getting tired of this constant demand from Ukraine, right? That nothing is ever enough. Well, in war, that's actually the case. This is a reminder of what major warfare is like. It doesn't end prettily. It costs much more in lives and treasure than anybody had anticipated. And the economies here in the United States and in Europe in particular are unprepared for that. We've got huge social entitlement programs. I mean, we're looking at a $7 trillion federal budget for FY23. $7.3 trillion. We'll have a $2+ trillion budget deficit, adding that much more. We're spending more than we're taking in. And 2/3 of that is obligated spending, right? Medicare and Social Security and these others. So this quibbling over how much we're spending is less than 1/3 of the budget. So all these measures won't do anything to hit the $33 trillion. So if you take that domestic debate and now you look at how much more money do we want to give to Ukraine, it's no surprise that there is this weariness of constantly trying to fund this war in this far-off land, right? And so the future problems of a Russian win really don't resonate with a lot of people back here in the United States, where we're dealing with, identity politics and gender confusion and mounting national debt. So I think her comment reflects a rising frustration with, the constant demands that war call for. And so where does this lead? I think eventually it leads to Russia owning Crimea and probably that part of Ukraine that they currently sit on, because Ukraine can't get sufficient military support to mount an offensive against an entrenched defensive position that the Russians have been able to put together over the last 6 months. So it's an accumulation of events, both political, economic, and the military situation on the ground, that it's going to make it very, very hard for Ukraine to undo on their end, and we've got our own problems here at home.
Dakota Wood served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He's Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
It's great being with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on